Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 8, Intro to Black Creative Expression. This week, we are going to, well, other weeks we've kind of skipped around a bit, but this week we're going to concentrate more or less on 1965 to about 1975. So we're looking at the era of the civil rights movement through the Black Power movement into something that transitions into maybe like the disco era. Let's just call it the disco era. Everybody knows what that means. Here, the first image you see here is the album cover for poetry, an album of poetry by the Last Poets. This particular song is called This Is Madness. And so we want to reflect on what artists were making during this time, what they were saying about the time period, reflecting it, being the voice of the nation, and making statements that would last for generations, that documented what was happening. So you have a song you're going to be listening to. It's called A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. And you can see here a couple different album covers. You can see one has an image of him, and you can see another has an image of the times and how militarized the US government had become against people who were protesting for civil rights. When you listen to this song, you're actually going to be listening to it as a sort of like song that's put over a scene in a movie called Malcolm X that was created and directed by Spike Lee. And so there's no other sound except the song, but you're going to see a whole scene happen with the song playing. Another iconic song of the era was Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. It's still an iconic song, and it was performed by one of the most famous performers of the 1960s and in American history. He got the title King of Soul, and that is James Brown. He was considered a sex symbol in his era also. He was an incredible dancer who just excited crowds everywhere. He sang and he had an entrepreneurial spirit, and people said that he was a ruthless perfectionist of a manager of the artists that he worked with. You're also going to listen to another anthem of the times, and that was Respect by Aretha Franklin. And it was originally written by Otis Redding, a Black man, but she made a cover of it and turned it around and made it a really popular song that everybody sang in that time period. And even though it was really mostly about her relationship to one man, somehow it got transferred into a chorus for the movement, for the civil rights movement, and also the feminist movement as well. Everywhere you would see that Black people from 1965 to 75 were trying to reflect or create Black power. There was definitely an interest in doing this because they had been oppressed and disenfranchised and kept away through institutionalized racism from having power as much as possible, not just in the United States, but around the world. Any particular places where European anti-Blackness was, that was where you were going to have people of African descent fighting for Black power. And while all of this was happening, as I said, the government was turning against people who were fighting for rights. And if you're really interested in going a step further with that, let me just go a step back. Did I mention it before? No, I didn't. Okay. There was a FBI and was at war with the civil rights activists of the era. And so many were jailed and killed or surveilled and followed and threatened and all kinds of crazy things. A lot of organizations and meetings were being infiltrated. You can go and find out more information about this. I'll show you another slide in a moment where you can, and give you a key term that you can research. So this is an iconic kind of image from the era where you see people sitting outside of a bus. And these were the Freedom Riders. And so as you can see, the movement was not just Black people. It couldn't have happened without people who were allies to Black people to help and put their lives on the line as well. John Lewis is right here, and he was one of those Freedom Riders. And you can look up who the Freedom Riders were and what they were doing. They were taking bus rides through the segregated South to make a statement against segregation. And for that, many paid with their lives. John Lewis became a politician who recently passed away in the past couple of years, by the way. And then this is a painting by Faith Ringgold, and she did this in the 60s or the early 70s. And you can see here that we have people of all, well, not all, but Black and white, male and female, who have blood on them and appear to be protesting and trying to figure out what's going on in the era. You can see the scale of the painting by the person standing in front of it. And so here is a document that represents some of the type of programs that the US government had against people who were fighting for rights. So if you want to go look up COINTELPRO, oh, I forgot to put that here. That COIN, like a coin is money, and then TEL, and then PRO as one word, which is an acronym, and I forgot what it stands for, but you can find documents online that were released at some point or leaked that showed what the government was doing against people who were fighting for civil rights. And it wasn't just Black people, it was many different types of people across the United States who were fighting against oppression and who were coming together to join forces to try to make change. This included Native Americans, for example, and Mexican Americans, etc. So one of the most famous activists who was jailed during the time was Angela Davis. You can see a Jet magazine here has her on a cover. Jet magazine was a popular Black magazine during the time that will report on Black news. And also another very young but very promising activist named Fred Hampton was killed in his house. A recent documentary came out about his life. I'm sorry, not documentary, I think it was a biopic, which I have not seen yet and I would like to. And so one of the things that my generation has lamented on is how many people were lost, how many of our leaders were lost during that time, so that by the time we get to the late 1880s and into the 1990s, we definitely were missing a generation of leadership. And you can just Google images of civil rights protesters. In this case, I Google searched dogs on Black civil rights protesters. It was quite a lot of violence that was happening to activists as they were trying to be nonviolent. There were also a section of activists who were more in the line of Malcolm X, which was by any means necessary. So they picked up arms and they shot back or they fought back as well. But for the most part, the majority of people participated in non-violent activism as a philosophy and practice. And so again, this is the image from This Is Madness, The Last Poets. One of the things also that you can notice about this image is they're kind of wearing like African clothes. There's like African colors, there's African drums, big Afro hairstyles, which are natural African hair. And so there was definitely a kind of interest in everything African and it being researched, promoted, and put into popular culture in a way that it had never been done before in American history. Not since the early 19th century had the majority of people of African descent in the United States considered themselves African before the 1960s. At some point after this international slave trade ended and generations of people started to be born here in America that were of African descent, there was a shift in the 1800s, so that by the mid 1800s, most were considering themselves to be Black or trying to figure out what name to call themselves. And there wasn't as much of an emphasis on African as there had been in the past. And so again, the 1960s brought that back around, and you'll see that through every aspect of African-American culture in the 1960s, from fashion to hair, to beauty, to music, to art, to food, to even the words that people use to talk, like slang. This is probably the most iconic militant organization of the 1960s and 70s, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And these were two of the leaders, and they were college educated, nerdy students who were like, we're gonna fight back against police that are coming to our neighborhoods. We're gonna organize. If they can have guns, then we have the right to bear arms as well. And we're gonna shoot back if they shoot us. And in addition to that, they had a lot of community programming like free lunch in schools. That is a direct effect or legacy of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense that did not exist before the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was a fundraising organization as well, with many chapters around the United States. In a similar way to Black Lives Matter, they had quite a bankroll, and they would do a lot of community services in addition to trying to defend the community against police violence. So that included feeding people, educating people, training people, trying to get people opportunities, and also coalitioning with other allied groups, such as people who may have been LGBT, people who were handicapped, other ethnic groups. They were against class oppression as well. And so this is a quote from Bobby Zeal, who has a really amazing book about the Black Panther Party. And he says, you don't fight racism with racism. The best way to fight racism is with solidarity. And so I really want to point this out to people because I just want people to know that there is nothing magical about activism. There may be a few leaders who have a lot of charisma, but a lot of it is grunt work. And so you need to be a part of an organization if you expect anything to happen. Showing up at a protest is okay. Retweeting a hashtag, that's okay too. But really, to get the most work done, you need to be part of an organization. And so one of the reasons why movement was able to, was a possibility in the 1960s politically is because so many people were mobilized. Most everybody was a part of an organization or two or three or four or five. And so they were working to get things done. Activists were actively working to get people to be in organizations and to have more power in numbers, petition, to protest, to put power behind themselves, to put their money together to make it work. And so we see activists today are doing the same thing. And so that's why if you're in this class and you have any type of social, political objective that you would like to see met, get into any kind of organization. Start with one, just pick one, anyone, get into it and start doing stuff with them. We talked about Black beauty. Black is beautiful is that sort of slogan. And you can search for that hashtag and see what comes up. And so again, there was definitely an emphasis in this period of rejecting the idea that Black people are ugly and that Black people are stupid and that Black people cannot be successful in society, that we can't take care of ourselves. And so you can see kind of like these images of people, like beautiful women behind each letter. This was a pageant, Miss Black America, I think was 1970. And as you can see, almost all the women, every single woman has an afro, natural hair, no straightening, no curling, no rollers, no perms, no relaxers, no conks, not even braids. The Staple Singers had a song called Respect Yourself that is played at parties just as much as the James Brown song and the Aretha Franklin song that you have in to listen to this week. And so you can go and take a look at a live performance of them singing it at the Watts Stax concert in Watts, which happened a few years after a major, major riot, which was sparked by police violence in 1965 in Watts, California. I didn't put this one in, I kind of forgot. And then you already had so many other music to listen to, I didn't put it in, but I just want to mention that the hard bop jazz from 1965 to 1968 is some of my personal favorite. And this is one of my #1 favorite jazz songs ever of all time. It's considered a classic. It's called A Love Supreme. So there is a song called The Love Supreme, and I think the whole album is called The Love Supreme. It has maybe 4 songs on it, and they all just flow right into each other. And one of the things that if you've ever heard the song or you like to go listen to it, you like jazz, that kind of thing, the thing I want you to consider is that how amazing was it that these jazz musicians often without using any words at all were able to also capture the spirit of the era, to protest through the music without actual words. And people were listening all around the world to it. So you're going to be reading your chapter 5 in Black Art and Culture, the 20th Century. And you're going to be also watching a video review of Art in the Age of Black Power. It's actually called Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power. It's such a long title, I have to actually turn and look at my book collection to remember the name of the whole exhibit. And so you're going to compare and contrast the chapter 5 in the book to the video review of many of the same artists, the same time period, and just see what's similar and different about the chapter versus the review. And I really want you to try to pick up on the theme of Black Power. What is it that artists were trying to do with this theme of Black Power? How were they trying to put this into their work? How were they trying to reflect it? What were they thinking about? Did this change their style? Did it change the content of the work? Did it cause them to organize in different ways, maybe that they hadn't organized before? Those are all the type of questions I want you to think about. And so you're going to have to listen carefully and read carefully to kind of figure out what Black Power means. You may also need to Google it. I didn't provide a definition of Black Power, although I could, but I think you can Google it and get some good ideas. And so many of you in last week's visual notes put in Jay Jarrell's revolutionary suit, which is quite clever. You can see, I think this is her, I'm not exactly sure, but you can see here a woman wearing the revolutionary suit, and then you can see it here as artwork inside of an art gallery in an art or museum in an exhibit. And behind that are some paintings by Jeff Donaldson, and both of them were part of an organization called Africoba. Here's a definition of the Black arts movement. You can take a moment, pause the video for a second and go ahead and read that. And Emory Douglas may not have been officially part of that particular movement, but everywhere around the United States, you saw that artists were concerned with all of these subjects. And so Emory Douglas was a minister of arts and culture for the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. So he created a lot of graphic images and illustrations for the Black Panther newspaper. So you can see here, it says Black Community News Service. And then here's some of his images. You can see it's like a collage mixed with some drawing. And then he also made fine art artworks as well. And Amiri Baraka is credited with being the initiator of the Black arts movement. So the Black arts movement was like the arts section of the Black Power movement. And it started in New York City. Amiri Baraka was the most famous writer, or one of the most famous writers of that time period. And so he founded a school called the Black Arts Repertory Theater School in Harlem. And you can read about the mission here, that it would be a school and it would promote the arts. And you can read a quote here by him, just pause the video and read it. And try to take a look at the picture here. That's him holding the flag and walking through the street in a Black arts parade. Another person very much allied with Amiri Baraka was Sonia Sanchez. And so she was a poet, and she was African-American, just homegrown, plain old African-American. She married a Puerto Rican man and took his last name. So that's how she got the last name Sanchez. I think she's born in like Mississippi or Alabama. And so she's a really well-known poet that I have to check and see if she's still alive. I think she passed away within the past few years. The most fundamental truth to be told in any art form, as far as Blacks are concerned, is that America is killing us. And so that's a quote from Sonia Sanchez. So some of you have already seen the image from previous weeks of Barclay Hendricks' work. Well, it's also the cover art on the book that accompanies the exhibit that is being reviewed in the video this week, Soul of a Nation. And this is an image of the actual exhibit in the Broad, and you can see that there's different types of media. There looks like a poster was made to cover a wall, and different kinds of people, not just Black people, that are actually in the exhibit. Oh, you can see Faith Ringgold's painting back here in the background. It's a traveling exhibit, so it went to more than one location. Romar Bearden is an artist that was mentioned in your reading this week and in the video. Sometimes he's put with the Harlem Renaissance artists too, because he started making artwork in the 40s. And some people stopped the Harlem Renaissance about 1945. Yeah, but he's also affiliated with the 60s as well. So he made work for a long time and it actually changed. And he was a part of arts organizations as well. One thing you can notice, I'm not sure that you can notice it so easily here, but in some of his other work, you'll notice that he takes photographs and collages them together. So he'll actually use images of like African sculptures, for example, and then mix them in with parts of real photographs of Black people, and then put them in ways that have a kind of African sensibility to them, which is really a thing that defines some of his work. And this is me with Faith Ringgold. And so, you know, this chapter 5 talks about visual art, moving media, various arts groups, schools of thoughts, various aesthetic philosophies and styles, and varying strategies to relatively similar endpoints, from service to freedom of expression for Black power. And this was an exhibit at the California African American Museum about 3 or 4 years ago. And I got to introduce Faith Ringgold, read her bio and introduce her for her to speak to the audience. And so the exhibit was called We Wanted a Revolution, Black Radical Women, 1965 to 85. And the purpose of the exhibit was to highlight Black women artists who had more challenges in general than Black men in getting respect and getting out there and getting their work putting out there, even creating the work in the first place. So the exhibit just highlighted the contributions of Black women who were making art during that time. And so this was the image of Faith Ringgold's that I put in earlier in this slideshow. And then this is one of the paintings that she did, I believe, in the 80s or 90s. And you can see it has a whole different vibe to it, different flavor, different set of colors. But she became more well known for her quilts, her story quilts, than her paintings of the earlier era of her work. And so all over, African Americans and people of African descent in the world look towards the Black arts movement as a very specific time with iconic art that was often graphic, didactic. It was direct, it wanted results, and there was a proliferation of artists who were making art for high art for museums and galleries, but also for everyone else to enjoy as well who couldn't afford the art. So reproductions became more popular as well. And this was also a time where technology was opening up, where you have television, telephone, telegrams. People are writing letters to each other. Airplanes are starting to fly places, and people of African descent are starting to travel more and interact with each other to figure out this problem of anti-Blackness around the world, and asking the question of how to get more power for people of African descent, so Black power, as well as ending white supremacy. So this is a journal of contemporary African art, and this issue came out in 2011. And it names some of the people that it considers iconic or relevant to the Black arts movement that are going to be featured in this particular issue. And I just also want to, I don't think I've emphasized this before, so I thought I'd throw in a slide to emphasize the fact that we know that there's funk music, jazz music, blues music, and hip hop music. But I also want to emphasize that each represents a total aesthetic, an artistic, creative aesthetic, so that artists who were not only musicians, but who were also every other kind of creative, also took up these concepts and tried to explore them through their creative work. So that could be art, it could be acting, it could be poetry, it could be writing, like literature, like novels, for example, dance. And so I just wanted to remind everyone of that. If you would like to go more deeply into these particular subjects, there are other courses in Black Studies or the African American Studies department where you can focus on specific things like, hip hop or, African American music or that kind of thing. So if you're interested and want to know more, remember that you can always go look and take another class, that this is an intro class. So you're just getting a little sip of this, a little taste of that, a little pinky in this, a little pinky in that. And artists who, not an artist, I should say, another distinctive form of art to develop during this time period was album cover art. So illustrative album cover art. And the albums were like, 12 inches by 12 inches squared. Sometimes they folded out and had several different pages and pockets, and they had a front and a back. So it was really great opportunity to put art there. And a lot of the funk musicians, a lot of the Black musicians of the era went out of their way to find the wildest and most creative artists that they could get to make their album covers. And so there are a lot of collectors of these albums, not simply because of the music, but because of the album art. And so Pedro Bell was one of the most famous of the funk musicians, of the funk, funk bands, album covers. You can see some of them here. This is him. This is a more recent photo of him. And you can see that some of his works are framed behind him. And you can also Google that on your own, funk music album covers, and see what comes up. They're really wild and fun. Another thing I just want to bring to your attention, again, about the travel, is that as the civil rights movement was happening in the United States, it wasn't an independent movement where it was isolated to one place. We are talking about an international movement against class oppression, against colonialism that's happening in the world during the 1960s. So it's just a highly charged time everywhere, even in Mexico and South America, the Caribbean, Africa, many places in the world, Asia, India, people were fighting back against colonialism and oppression. And so you can see here, I've included a map here that shows what Africa looked like prior to independence, and then what it looks like after independence. So you can see how there's more countries created. Some countries have been renamed after they fought wars against European countries in order to have their independence. And so there was a lot of solidarity amongst people of African descent who were educated and activists, and that everybody wanted to get free. And so the first nation to get its independence was Ghana, which is located right here. And the first president of Ghana was Kwame Nkrumah. And he traveled to the United States and was a student here. He was a Ghanaian American African student. So the 1960s saw a rise in African students going to Europe and to the United States to be educated. Caribbean people of African descent also were coming to the United States and going to Europe or Africa. People were moving around and in ways that put them in contact with each other, in ways that would change, when they went back to their countries, would change life forever in their countries. So you can see that Kwame Nkrumah here is standing with Martin Luther King. This just shows that, people were talking to each other. They were interacting with each other. And this is a photo by Gordon Parks of Malcolm X. And remember, we had an assignment where we looked at Gordon Parks' work. This is an iconic photograph of Malcolm X. So he talks about what revolutionary Black nationalism is to him. And so you can just pause this video and read it, and just know that things were highly charged up, especially after his death, and after A certain section of people of African descent were kind of tired of nonviolent protests and were looking for something more direct and more aggressive. An artist that's mentioned in your materials this week is Barbara Chase Rouveau, who did abstract sculptures that were rather large scale. And how does an abstract artist reflect the Black Power movement? You'll get to hear about that in the chapter that you read and in the video review of the art exhibit that you'll be watching. Barbara Chase Rouveau is also a writer and a children's book author. And just to kind of show again how there's many different types, this whole full spectrum of Black thought and Black ideas when it comes to assimilation versus separatism, or even a sense of unity for people of African descent. And so this is a chart that I came across this week that I thought was interesting that I share with you. So it's showing that in general, a person who's Black identified would recognize racial solidarity. They would say, yes, we're together in some way. We should be together in some way. We should work on these things. And then a progressing level of Black nationalism is just more articulate about that. It's more intentional and more articulate. And then Black nationalism can be divided up into these 5 different categories, which overlap for many people. Some people might emphasize one, but they could be overlapping, and people could have several of these at one time they could believe in. Black cultural nationalism, Black religious nationalism, Black political nationalism, Black economic nationalism, Black territorial separatism. And so that last one right there is basically put with Black separatism as probably being the most radical of all the different ways of thinking of oneself and their Blackness in relationship to the rest of the United States, or even the rest of people of African descent in the world. And so there are some who would be far over here on the side of like racial solidarity. If there was another box, they might be the ones who say they don't see race at all. They're a human being first. So they might be far over there. But then at the same time, they could be espousing some ideas of Black economic nationalism, even though they say that. And they could have, their emphasis could be on the significance or the importance of Black business. They might not care about religion. They might not care about living in a Black community. They might not care about Black arts at all, that kind of thing. But they believe that Black people should own businesses and should shop at Black businesses. So that could be an example of how, you know, maybe this is a little bit too linear, and it should be more like circles that overlap in some ways and have a web of lines connecting them in different ways. Another album cover art, and this is Fela Kuti, Why Black Man Dey Suffer. And I have a very terrible Nigerian accent to say that. And so take a look at the artwork, pause the video for a moment and take a look. You can see the star right here is over the country of Nigeria, which is where he was from. Now, the interesting thing is, because of the colonial system of education, there are many Africans who don't know anything about the slave trade either. When Fela Kuti came to the United States, he claims that he became radicalized by meeting African Americans, that he developed his sense of Black self and Black consciousness and desire for Black power from coming to the United States and meeting Black Americans and seeing how Black Americans were fighting. And this is something that if you know enough or you read enough about Africans and Caribbeans who've come to the United States, it's often something that they will say. And similarly, Black people in America who travel to other places often have some type of eye-opening experiences also that introduce them into the world of Pan-Africanism and radicalize them as well. So you have a clip from the theatrical musical, Broadway musical called Fela. And these actors are playing Fela Kuti, and actresses / dancers are playing his wives. He had a whole lot of wives. And so it's a fun musical. actually this woman here in the pink skirt was one of my women who lived in my dorm when I was in college. And so I was really proud to see that she was in it. And I got to go backstage and meet a lot of the actors and actresses, as well as the fact that the after party was hosted at a woman named Sandra's house. And Sandra is someone who is friends with Fela Kuti, and she claims that she's the person who did most of the work to radicalize him. I don't know if that's true, but it's kind of a fun story. It's fun gossip to hear. So again, I just wanted to throw in a couple of images of, you know, some of the people that we've covered in class traveling and how they're interrelated. That is the creatives and the political people. So you can see Malcolm X with Maya Angelou, the poet that we had in a week or two prior to this one. And this is an artist that yeah, she's mentioned in the reading, I believe, and in the video, Betty Saar. And so I tried to find a picture of her in Haiti, but I didn't find one. I could have emailed one of her daughters and asked, but I just didn't go that far. So you can see, just pause this and read this and just know that here I'm talking about, I'm giving you a list of about 5 people who wrote or have experiences recorded outside of the United States, and they were kind of, you know, iconic or significant in some way, important to African-American history for their travel or something that they did. So that's Olaudah Equiano, Paul Cuffe, Martin Delany, Harriet Jacobs, Marcus Garvey, and Josephine Baker. In the case of Paul Cuffe, Martin Delany, and Marcus Garvey, they all advocated a return to Africa. And Paul Cuffe was half Ghanaian, he was actually an African, mixed with Native American, a Delaware ethnic group, I can't remember the name of it. And he was the first person who had some African descent who took a ship of people, Black people, in the United States back to Africa during the slave era. So he has a very interesting story. And here's Betty Saar with 2 of her daughters who are also artists. I didn't mean to go that far. And one of the things that they explore besides deep African-American themes is mixed race heritage exploration. So they are mixed race people. And so that comes into their work as well. And this is a really excellent art book where I saw the exhibit, and I have the book, and I can highly recommend it. It is one of the best art exhibits I've ever seen in my entire life. They are master artists, and they're nearly visual artist royalty in the African-American world of art. And so this is one of Betty Saar's artworks right here. And, you know, she definitely became well known for taking these Americana images of Aunt Jemima and, like, you know, flipping them and turning them into more powerful, iconic images. So you can see here, she's got a militant gun and then a broom in the other hand and an American flag in front of her skirt. Oh, the reason that I wanted to just talk about how going to Haiti has had a huge impact on a lot of African-American artists. And so that's just a side note. And then I put this in here, NDRE, but I think that we'll talk about it next week or in a following week. So there's a song by NDRE called Brown Skin, but I'll bring that in another week. And so the pilgrimage to Africa has been an important one for a lot of African Americans. Ghana is one of the countries that has been most aggressive about marketing to African American tourists, building relationships, getting us to come there. And so W.B. Du Bois, who's one of the most important Black intellectuals of the 20th century, was friends with Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana. And W.B. Du Bois was one of the primary organizers of the New Negro Art Exhibition at Paris in 1900. I think we covered that, or is mentioned in a previous week. So he had an interest in art for the purposes of advancing Black civil rights as well. He actually was invited to come live in Ghana in the 1960s. Maybe it was prior to the 1960s. But yeah, Nkrumah invited him to come there and live there. And he actually died in Accra, Ghana, and there's a center dedicated there to him. And I visited there. And so here's a video that I took at the center in Accra, Ghana. And these are kids from Harlem or Brooklyn, New York City, let's just say New York City, who are there on a trip with a combination of people who are African, like born in Africa, as well as African Americans. And so they were put through a ceremony where they were renamed with Ghanaian names. They received a formal apology from Africans for their role in the slave trade. Libations were poured for the ancestors, dances were danced, songs were sung, food was prepared, and oh my gosh, I feel like I'm about to cry again. It was such an emotional moment for me. I was not part of this group, but I happened to be there when they came along, and I like participated in everything they were doing, and it was extremely powerful. So here are some of the kids learning Ghanaian dances. So that was just a little short clip. I took a lot of pictures and videos. I hope that you could hear the sound in that. I hope I set it up right while doing the Zoom. Hope you felt the energy of it if you couldn't hear too much. Another thing you're going to be doing is looking at Soul Train, like just one video of Soul Train and the dancing line that Soul Train has become famous for. Now, some people might think that just because people call it the Soul Train line, that it was invented on Soul Train. It was not. It has its origins in Africa, like many things, Black American, and it made it into the show, but then the show became so famous that people referred to it as a Soul Train line. So there are many forms of line dancing that happen in Africa and throughout the African diaspora. And so you're going to be taking a look at this show and like trying to find out, well, what was the craze about Soul Train? What was so significant about it? Why did it come along at the time that it did? And Ebony Magazine was another magazine that was really super critical in the time. And so Jet Magazine and Ebony were probably two of the most famous magazines. I don't know why this is here right now. Okay, let me just sing that. Okay, all right. And so you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but you know what? February 1973, that's what it is. That's what it says at the bottom. It says, is the Afro on the way out? So for the entire 1960s, the Afro had been like, if you had an Afro in 1960, you were radical. You were really like cutting edge, right? You were like avant-garde. You were like above the curve. So by the mid 1960s to late 1960s, most Black people had an Afro. But by 1973, Ebony Magazine has this cover saying, is it about to go out of style? Are we going to do something different? Are we tired of Afros now? So I thought it was an interesting cover. And I also wanted to show you Ebony Magazine and mention it. And I also wanted to transition us into the period following that. Here are a couple of funny quotes that were said to me that I've put into the lecture this week. So you can just pause it and read it. But yeah, I was talking to a printing colorist that I have, and she's a textile printer. And she said, there was nothing natural about it. It was hard to keep your Afro just right. So I don't know if she just meant herself or everyone, because she had really soft, fine hair that was like more straight than like Afro-like. So I don't know, but I thought it was a funny thing that she said. And then Michelle Wallace is a filmmaker, and she's the daughter to Faith Ringgold. So the day that I introduced Faith Ringgold at the museum, I was with Michelle and Faith for most of the time for this event at the museum. And so she was looking around the room at the different women who were in the room who were artists, Black women. And she just made a comment offhand that was like, wow, you know, back in the day, everyone's Afro had to be the same. And now when I see young people, they have a lot more individuality. Even the women with weaves have a certain swagger. It's like a, whatever, it's mine, I paid for it. So she was commenting on how Black women who wear natural hair without any chemical processes, that each person's hair has its own slight cut or taper or, way of looking at different textures. But the thing that these two women were commenting about is that during this time of the civil rights movement, it's like almost everyone's afro had to represent unity. It had to be perfectly round and fluffy and picked out. And there are plenty of jokes about people who have bad afros from that time, like floppy afros or bad afros. And so I'm ending off this slideshow overview with The Wiz. And so in the mid to late 1970s, The Wiz came out, and it features some of the biggest stars of the time. The soundtrack was done by Quincy Jones, has become a very famous movie soundtrack. Michael Jackson is in it, and Diana Ross, and they were two of the biggest stars of the time. There's song, there's dance, there's amazing costumes, there's fantasy. It's delightful and it's family friendly. And it's it's like a Black take on The Wizard of Oz. So you have a song that you can listen to there. It's called Can You Feel a Brand New Day? And that is where we're going to end this lecture for the week. And that is it.